Right, welcome. So I'm going to be doing a recording for chapter 39 W for Econ 203. Okay, so this is going to be kind of a new thing I'm going to do here. It's a little different format than I've done in the past. But hopefully it'll work out for you. And so what we're going to talk about today is the economics of developing countries. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this to 30 minutes or less, and that will allow you to watch this and then go on and do the discussion board for this video, and you'll be able to get the points wrapped up for this this video. Okay. All right, so we're seeing here, we're going to talk about developed countries, and in doing so, we're really talking also about less developed countries, right? So we're going to be distinguishing between the two, between industrial advanced countries and developing countries. So those are the two types, okay? So we're going to look at differences in incomes and GDP. So income levels are going to be incomes of individuals, right? And so that really relates back to the standard of living and average income, earning power, okay, of the individual who's working. And GDP, really what we're talking about here is we're talking about countries that have large production, right? GDP stands for gross domestic product. It doesn't necessarily mean that the income or the wealth is shared amongst all the people, but we can generally look at a country and we can tell the standard of living within the country by taking total GDP per year and divide that by the population. So GDP per capita gives us per capita income. So here's a number that's on our slide of per capita income for 2010 is a number that the year that we're gonna have here, and that's for developing countries or economically industrially advanced, I should say, industrially advanced countries. Ones that definitely have well-developed market economies. Okay, so we're not talking about socialist countries here or dictators or stuff like that. We're talking about true market economies. So, anyways, so those are going to be the kind of what we're going to talk about here and the classifications that we have. Okay, as we look globally at the map, we're able to tell here in the darker green sections, right? Darker green sections like the United States here. These are going to be some of our industrially advanced countries. High income right here, right? It's 12,267, which is actually a pretty low bar for some of the advanced countries. That's all of Europe here. Some of the Middle East there. Australia is going to be in that pool as well. We've got Venezuela down here, which is currently not part of that. They're having some economic troubles. We got Iceland and Greenland up there, Canada as well, our neighbors to the north. Right? So we've got upper middle, which includes our neighbors to the south, right? A lot of our neighbors to the south. Lower middle, okay, that's gonna be some of the more developing countries here, right? Mongolia. Okay. So we got some in South America as well. And in Africa. So Africa is kind of one of those split countries, right? So we also have the lower income in Africa. And we also have some of that in the far east countries. So just to kind of take some comparisons of the total differences here. So U.S. GDP per year, right? This is 14.6 trillion. The combined GDP of the developed countries, all of them together are 20 trillion. So you can kind of see the comparison, right? U.S. has 4.5% of the world's population, yet produces 23.1% of the world's output. So productivity is super important for industrially advanced countries. U.S. per capita, so this is per person, right? Per capita, per person GDP is 127 times that of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So if you take right, so somebody from the U.S. And somebody from the Congo, right? So this person is going to may not necessarily have, but is maybe more has more access to 127 times the resources, goods, and services that the person in the Congo is going to have. Okay. Also, large countries like Walmart, even Apple, right, is going to be right up there as well. Walmart's annual revenues is greater than all but 23 of the nation's total GDP. So if it were to be sat in the nations of the world, it would be 24th largest nation, just Walmart, right? And its ability to produce goods and services, okay? So just because this is the current situation, so this is the current situation, doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the current situation or the future situation, right? Trends are actually going against the status quo, okay? So you'd think, well, maybe the industrial advanced countries are going to be this way forever. They're going to always have the upper hand economically. Not so, right? So there's some countries that are developing here. China, Malaysia, Chile, Thailand. There's also some, they call them the BRIC countries, okay? So Brazil, Russia, India, and China, okay? So that's the BRIC country as well that are also developing a lot. So some developing countries have high incomes. So this is an interesting one. This actually was created before the problems with Greece. We see that possibly high incomes and non-developing countries that have high incomes may not be sustainable. Greece is definitely not sustainable. They propped up their economy and their incomes with debt, not production. So that's why they aren't necessarily going to be up there in the high income companies anymore, or countries anymore. Even though a lot of the developing countries are gaining ground, the income gap is still widening. Okay, so the developing countries have to grow faster to reduce the gap. Okay, so let's go on to the next one here. So here's some indicators on how the developing countries can continue to gain traction, right? Continue to develop. So these are some things that typically go along with developed countries, or indicators of development. Right? Okay, so this is basically just the income levels, right? So that's not necessarily going to be an indicator of development. It's kind of like the result of development. Okay, this as well, life expectancy at birth. Okay, so this goes hand in hand. So the healthier the population, the more productive. The more productive, more GDP, right? More per capita income. So these go hand in hand. Under 5 mortality rates, kind of the same thing. Okay, now we go on into the next, which is education. Okay, education information. So this is health. So here's some key indicators on health, which is a big part of becoming a developed country, or at least increasing standard of living. Okay, so here's education and information. Okay, so these are also two main indicators. Adult literacy rates, right? Or illiteracy, amount of adults that can't read. So this is important. Definitely makes more productive workforce, right? If everybody can read. Also helps with overall education and being able to be healthy and to be able to do all those things that you need to do in life to develop. Internet users per 1,000. So this is per 100 of users right here. So this is definitely changing as the mobile internet is becoming more accessible. So this is one of the spots where developed countries are definitely gaining ground. Okay, per capita energy consumption. This is maybe a bad one, right? So developing countries typically use more energy per person. Is it sustainable energy or is it not? For the most part, it's mostly non-sustainable energy, right? So like gasoline, coal, those type of things. So that's really a challenge going forward with developed countries, or developing countries, is as they develop, then one of the byproducts of developing is using more energy, using more of those fossil fuels and those kind of things. So that's one of the problems that we have to find. So, or one of the indicators, one of the things that's attached with development is energy use. Okay, so here's some obstacles to development. Okay, so efficiency, using existing resources, right? So a lot of countries have existing resources. Either they haven't expanded or haven't tapped into those resources, or they use them relatively inefficiently. So that's some obstacles. Part of it's energy, part of it's some other resources that may be that more sustainable, right? It differs between countries, so you can't necessarily generalize on what just developed countries do, because there's all sorts of different countries in various shades, various colors of the rainbow, right? Okay, so here's some other obstacles, right? Shortage of land. That's a real issue for some countries. Shortage of land. Okay. There could also be a shortage of resources or power. So those kind of natural resources, if there's a shortage, where do they get them? They have to buy them elsewhere. So they have to have something to trade. We just went through the last couple of chapters, right, on trade. So how do they trade? Well, if they don't have a lot to trade, then they're not going to be able to fulfill their demand for land, resources, and power. Power as an energy, right? Energy. Okay, tropical climates hinder labor. So this is a climate issue. There's a lot of, if we go back to our map here. Okay, so right here is the equator, right? Right here, this region. This is the equator. So see how many dark green countries or high-income countries are in that band. Not many, right? Because of these issues involved with tropical climates. They hinder labor, right? So when it's sunny outside and you need to be out working in the sunlight because you don't have power to with lights, when it's sunny outside, it's hot. You're not going to want to work. Okay. Also connected with this is, this is a good example right here happening right now. We have the Olympic Games coming in Brazil. What's going on in Brazil? It's the Zika virus. Where's Brazil at? It's in the tropics, right? And so we have diseases that are also rampant. That's an extra issue that these countries have to deal with that are on the equator that cause some problems. So you think, well, we would love to live in a place like this. Well, maybe not. If you want to be a productive person in the earth, there's definitely some benefits of not living in a tropical climate. Way more productive, way less disease. Okay? And those aren't necessarily easy to solve. A lot of the world is joining around trying to help, especially the different viruses and diseases. And so it's not necessarily easy for the countries in and of themselves to solve. It's a kind of a global issue that where they need help. Okay, so there also are some obstacles of development related to human resources, right? People. Okay, people make choices that aren't always the best choices for them, or for the economy, or for development, right? So some of these choices are how many people, population growth, right? Some populations in the world as a whole, I would argue that we have plenty to feed the people in the earth. Problem is distribution. In some countries, population growth is outstripping the resources of that country and the ability of that country to provide a sufficient standard of living. Okay? In these types of situations and in other situations, people save less and invest less. They're not as productive. Okay? In some cases where land is scarce, there's overuse of land resources or natural resources in general from overpopulation. A lot of people flee, run away from the country. Kind of China is a good example. Lots of land and resources in China. Tons of people go into the city, though, to go after that standard of living, right? There's jobs there. There's, visions of prosperity. And so they leave the country. The hard work that's done in the country, they go to the urban environment, and then they have huge cities that have, some problems in the cities. Standard of living is not better necessarily than it was in the country, right? But as we go through this is a natural cycle of development. Has been for current developed countries, right? Britain, the U.S., not necessarily all countries, but the U.S. has gone through a lot of these issues as it's grown, and as has all other developed countries gone through issues. Okay, so this is a good graph that just kind of shows land usage versus population increase. Okay, so for example, just because there's no space for people doesn't mean that they're not growing and increasing, right? So here's Bangladesh. Tons of people packed into a square kilometer. Annual rate of population increase is still going up. Much more than the U.S., for example, which only has 34 people per kilometer. Okay? So some of these things, even though it makes sense, you see them on paper and you think, wow, this country should make some major changes. Some of these issues aren't necessarily easy to just say, okay, hey, look, we're going to make a change. Maybe we don't want to all live in communist societies that say, okay, hey, look, you can only have one kid per couple. Do we want to live in that situation? Maybe not necessarily. Maybe we want to make that choice for ourselves. So this is really what the population is looking like, right? So the developing countries are going to make up most of the population growth here over the next 10, 20, 30 years. Okay? Unless there is a spread of health, education, and information, right, to these countries. I would also argue, we're going to talk about it in a minute, about talking about capital. Okay, so that's something that's also important to get out to people. Capital, or being able to have equipment and stuff to be productive with. Okay, so here's something that's a problem. Capital accumulation, which means that some countries are rich in capital resources, money, and like I said, equipment and buildings and technology, those type of things, right? And so really what needs to happen is, and this is really where the World Bank and some of those efforts go into, getting capital resources to countries that are developing so that they can have those capital resources needed to develop. It kind of works. The market system works better than, say, these do-gooding organizations, right? If you actually put the market to work and say, hey, look, in this country, there is cheap labor. We need to invest some capital into this cheap labor and make it productive, and give everyone, not necessarily just the people with those new jobs now, but everyone more products, more services, but a higher standard of living, whether it's in Thailand or in the United States or wherever we're producing and wherever we're consuming. That's kind of the market slant on it anyways. Okay? So technology, as it advances, right? We got to have advances and availability for technology in developing countries. Socio-cultural obstacles. Some countries say, you know what, advancement is not socially acceptable, right? So there may be a situation where you say, okay, we need more people driving or more people in the workforce. Well, the more people that need to drive or the more people that need to be in the workforce are women. So they may say, hey, you know what, women shouldn't work, or women shouldn't drive, or women, whatever the case is. So that's part of the obstacles that may come into some of the developing countries. So that comes with all sorts of, issues of how do you deal with that, and again, the market economy is a good way to help people kind of move their socio-cultural norms more towards something that is going to provide them with a higher standard of living. So institutional obstacles. Okay, so this here is government, right? Really, government issues, land reform, using land, making rules and laws to protect people's rights to own land or own resources. So really what you've come in with developing countries, what we want to try to avoid is we want to try to avoid the vicious cycle of poverty. So starting here, low income, low capital, and growing population of it. So not a lot of saving, because there's a lot of, they consume everything that they earn, right? They don't have a lot of demand because they can't buy anything, right? That's why there's not a lot of demand. There is a lot of demand, but there's no ability to buy the stuff, right? Okay, so then we have in the economy, we have low levels of investment and physical and human capital, right? So where do we get that? If we get it, then we can maybe short circuit this cycle of poverty. Education again, health, right? Information, all of those things, training. Okay, which leads, if we don't get that, it leads to low productivity. So people just aren't able to produce as much. They're not able to work. They're not healthy enough to work. They're not educated to be able to do special trades. And then we're about right back to earning low incomes. Okay, so we got to break it somewhere. Got to allow people to save. If you back up, you got to allow people to earn more income. How is that? You got to maybe make them healthier, maybe give them some capital. That's one of the things that has been done in some countries is microloans. So allowing people to buy capital or buy equipment or things that they need to start a business of their own. And so if microloans, meaning loaning people small amounts of money, $100, $1,000, to take that money and to start a business, it goes a long way in some of these developing countries. Allows them to get out of poverty and to help develop their country. Okay, so the role of government is important. We ended with this one on the last slide. So really what the role of government is doing is it's establishing the rule of law. Okay, protecting property, right? So we're protecting our rights to own and to earn. We're building an infrastructure. The government helps build roads and railroads and stuff like that. They help. Should it be capital? Should it be left to the free market? Possibly. Governments help develop trade, right? And that's really is an issue that the government should be part of. Building human capital, education. This really should be left up to the states, possibly. Maybe it's the federal government. Some form of government usually helps our education system move forward. Promoting entrepreneurship. Basically, that's removing roadblocks, allowing people to fail. Some people would say that promoting entrepreneurship requires good laws related to bankruptcy. So if people fail, they can go at it again. This has happened to a lot of entrepreneurs in America, where they mess up, they are able to regroup themselves and go on and be successful in the future. So that's debatable as well. Developing credit systems. So really to be able to trade more fluidly and easily with people and borrow and trade and lend money. A banking system, right? Controlling population growth. Is that really up to the government? I don't know. That's a good question. They can definitely help with family planning and stuff like that. That's a common role amongst the government. Should it be? Maybe, maybe not. And then this one, of course, is making peace with neighbors. Is the U.S. been good at that? I don't know. Are we peacemakers? I hope so. Sometimes to keep the peace, we have to have a big stick, right? So anyways. So, and then we've got some problems, of course, with people in countries being corrupt. Isn't necessarily the norm, but it's definitely out there. And so we see here down on the bottom, this is kind of the corruption index. These are some countries that are seen as super corrupt. Maybe related to drug and gangs, right? Or other issues that are supported or not supported by the government, right? And so what should more advanced nations do? So here's a question for the people that are more advanced, right? Or the countries that are, do they have a responsibility? Yeah, possibly. So they can definitely help expand trade, not with just other advanced nations, but also with developing nations to help them out. Because the more we've learned through specialization and trading, everybody can be better off, not just the advanced nations or the developing nations. Okay, admitting temporary workers. Then again, a win-win situation for both advanced and developing nations, especially if the workers go back to their countries of origin and with new training and new skills. Discouraging arms sales. So this is an interesting one. I just heard on the news that the U.S. is now going to continue arms sales with Vietnam, right? So Vietnam, is that really, is that a good idea to start selling guns and things to them? They say it's basically to help them stabilize their relations with their neighbors. Well, then again, that's kind of the saying of, if you, in order to have peace with your neighbor, you have to have a gun so they aren't tempted to try anything, right? Or prey upon you. I don't know. Is that a good idea or not? It seems like it might be, but that's kind of the path that's being taken. Foreign aid, direct aid, all this stuff. So advanced nations set up these. They're really one of the main reasons these are set up, and for trading and helping developing nations get their feet under themselves, especially when they have a hard time, like wars or famines, those types of things. Okay, so is this all good? The advanced nations are just angels helping each other out? Not necessarily, right? So there's definitely some issues that come with helping and that hinder countries, right? Dependency and incentives, right? If there's not incentives for countries to take over for themselves, they become dependent. And of course, there's bureaucracies set up beyond governments without borders, right? Corruptions and misuse, there's definitely some in that. I mean, you even go back to some of the sporting agencies that are international around the world, like FIFA, right? There was definitely some issues with that. And so anyways, so those are these are some of the percentage of GDP, some of the people or some of the countries that give more to places around the world. Okay. And so as we go back here, we kind of look at some of the problems with some of the worst off countries, okay, and really where their problems come from. And so, like, for example, a famine in Africa, right? So root causes, are they natural and human? They're both, right? Lack of planning, and just the nature kind of has a way of causing problems for people sometimes, right? Droughts were a lack of rainfall. Civil strife, the inability of people to work together to get through a crisis, happens because of wars, right? And civil strife. Continued population growth puts pressure on a low amount of resources that are currently available because of the drought. Okay? It also puts a strain on the environment. So really this is like the perfect storm for an economy, economically speaking, and in every other way, for a country to slip into a horrible standard of living, right? And so that's kind of why we have a safety net, internationally speaking. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank really is a safety net to help the countries out that are falling into this type of issue, and the UN peacekeepers and all that stuff, right? So is it good to have this safety net for countries that may fall off the face of the earth? Possibly it might be good to have a safety net. At the same time, if that takes away their incentive to make good choices, then there needs to be some consequences as well. So anyways, thanks for watching. It's been a great term. Have an awesome summer. We're going to be talking about, coming up here, we're going to be doing the last workout problems for chapter 39W, and we're going to do some final exam prep. So we'll see you then, and have a good day.